Welcome to the Boomer Buzz, the show that focuses on issues of interest to the 60 and over crowd, both here on Long Island and across the country. Listen as experts keep you informed about the latest health solutions, financial options, and lifestyle choices, both for senior citizens and their families. Now, here are the hosts of the Boomer Buzz, Dr. Lamarr Stanford and Patricia Stanford, corporate wellness consultant, on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC.
Welcome to the Boomer Buzz, where each week we'll give you the buzz on how to stay healthy, wealthy, and wise after the age of 60.
And today we're speaking with Amanda Lambert and Leslie Eckford, who are authors of this book called Aging with Care, a guide to hiring and managing caregivers at home.
Welcome to the show. It's an honor to have both of you speaking with us today on this important
Thank you for having
subject. I want to start with a very basic definition of a term that we hear thrown around quite a bit. What is aging in place?
Boy, that's a great question. Research has shown that people do want to age in place, and I think that typically that means aging in their own home. It doesn't necessarily mean aging in assisted living. It means putting together enough care so that you can live safely in your own home. What would you say, Leslie?
I would also say that the phrase is being borrowed by the senior care industry and the assisted living industry. I've heard a number of people say, well, my father was told that he could age in place. And this has become kind of tricky because, of course, assisted livings have rules and regulations that do not allow certain people with certain types of disabilities to stay in the building. So it sometimes is a promise that is not kept.
Okay, so when we're going to talk about aging in place, we're going to be talking about aging in your own home and staying in your own home. Okay, good. So as part of aging in place, either for ourselves or if we're thinking about a loved one that we need to care for, we need a plan and we need to assess whether we need help to carry out the plan. So how do we know when we need help, and how do we know what kind of help that we need?
Well, that's another great question. I think that Leslie and I both feel pretty tuned in to when people need help. And, we even think about ourselves. We think, well, when will we need help? We hope that we stay healthy enough that we'll need minimal help, but you can't always guarantee that. So I think for most people, it really depends on their physical needs and their cognitive needs. I mean, there are some people that are really physically healthy, but they have dementia. So They need help in the home, getting meals prepared or doing activities of daily living. And then there are other people that their minds are clear as a bell, but they may have fallen and broken a hip and gone to rehab and then need help in the home to recover. Or as there's sort of this slow decline physically, people find that they just need help to function day to day.
Okay.
And I would add to that it's not just the person, but it is the place that you're planning on aging in place in. That really has to be carefully assessed. For example, I talked to someone yesterday who has certainly does not have an issue with her long-term memory, but her house is over 100 years old. And when I said, so are you planning on staying there? She was like, oh, of course. But her plan was, in a few years, I'll deal with some changes in the house. And I said, I really encourage you to start thinking about that now and acting on that now.
Well, and how about those tri-levels? You have to climb the stairs to even get to the ground level, which is not really the living level, and then you have to go up to the living level, and then you have to go up to a third level to get to the bedroom, and sometimes the only bathroom.
Right,
so,
the only full bath.
Yeah. Exactly.
So do you help with things like that? Would you help to find contractors for people who would need help adjusting their homes to make them more friendly to people with disabilities?
Like installing grab bars and stuff like that?
Yeah, making the doorways wider?
Yeah, I do that as part of my consultation business. I refer to people who can make those kinds of adaptations. I mean, in some cases, a home will require so much work. I mean, it might require the kind of work like putting in the, what are the things called that go up the stairs? The glide?
The stair lifts. Yeah.
Oh, a stair lift.
Stair lift, yeah. And so, if you put in those kinds of, if you put in that kind of equipment, that may help somebody age in place, but it also doesn't necessarily increase the value of the home. I mean, sometimes it's hard to know how much to do and how little to do, but I agree with Leslie. It's like start before you need it and make some of those adaptations. I mean, there's nothing wrong with having grab bars. I mean, we all should have them, really. And then
they're
like
universally needed.
Yeah, in fact.
They're universally needed, exactly. Toilet risers, things like that are simple. They don't really, I think, impact the value of the home. But then when you get into, like, major reconstruction, some families are going to do that, and that's great if they can afford it.
Oh, yeah. Now, when we moved into my wife's parents' home, in the bathroom were some grab bars. This is 5 years ago.
That we had them, we had installed for them.
For her parents, and I said, is this lame? I am now using the grab bars.
Yeah.
Perfect. Perfect.
Yeah.
That's great.
Well, one of the things that I find is such a hard sell with people is an emergency response system.
Okay.
And, it just seems like people are so resistant. And I think they're making the sort of more accessible types of emergency response systems, like the Apple Watch 4, has fall detection. And, wearing a watch looks a lot cooler than wearing, a pendant. But people are so reluctant to wear a pendant, an emergency response system, and that, to me, should be sort of the first line of defense.
Yeah. And what about getting help in the home, like home health aides? When do you know that you're ready for an aide to come in?
Well, I mean,
I think that's just... Oh, sorry.
Oh, no, go ahead, Leslie.
I was going to say, I think that's really one of the hardest barriers for people, because we're usually talking about personal care. And the first time that people are going to encounter this is after a surgery, something that's already planned, like you were going to get a knee replacement or, sometimes a hip surgery, not under emergency situation. And suddenly you realize there is no way I'm getting up those stairs to my bathtub shower. And even when I get up there, I am not just going to hop over that tub to get in there by myself. And you may have a spouse or a partner who's going to help you, but even that people are resistant to. So they may get into that situation where the doctor or the hospital staff are going to say, let's get you some home health for a short period of time. And that's and people are just so relieved when that's over with. And that is the key, I think, to understanding, well, this is what the future may hold for me.
Yeah, we need to just take a short break here, ladies. You're listening to the Boomer Buzz on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC. I'm Dr. Lamarr Stanford, along with my wife, Patricia. And our guests today are Amanda Lambert and Leslie Eckford, who are authors of the book Aging with Care, A Guide to Hiring and Managing Caregivers at Home.
So let's go on with that thought. So the person comes in, is that the introduction to having help in the house? Is that usually how it goes?
Well, I think we just need to distinguish between, home health that's covered by insurance and home care, which is paid for privately.
Okay.
So under the type of home health that Leslie was referring to, certain criteria has to be met, and it's time limited. So I actually think it is a good way to introduce help into the home, because sometimes people are more, they're more amenable to a doctor ordering home health, and so they become accustomed to people coming in the home. And then when the insurance-paid home health stops, they may be more willing to hire privately because they still may need help, but they may not qualify under insurance.
Okay.
Now, how do we find competent help these days? Do you offer a service for that kind of activity?
Well, there's a golden question. When I think in Salt Lake City there are probably over 100 private duty home care companies and probably even more home health companies. And I think that is such a critical question. It's like, how do you evaluate? Mm-hmm. How do you evaluate whether you're going to get good care? Do they have good staff? Do they run their company well? And I think a lot of that is just kind of word of mouth. I mean, I have preferred companies that I refer to because I know that they treat my clients well. I trust them. But for families that are just out there looking, I think it's, and I don't know if Leslie can add to this, but I think talking to people, getting referrals, of course that didn't work very well in your situation, did it, Leslie?
No, it didn't.
Why, did you have a bad experience?
Yes. So, Amanda and I are professionals who have worked in geriatrics for years. And so when it came time for my own parents to have care at home, I thought, I'm an RN and I'm a licensed clinical social worker who's worked in aging. I'll be able to handle this, no problem. And in fact, I thought, I'll just hire them privately. I had excellent references, but I did not do a background check. And if I had done a background check, I would have found out that this person had a record, even with very skilled professionals having told me, this is the best person, you need to hire her as soon as possible because she's going to be, be sought after by other people quickly. And so I would say that often we make these decisions under pressure. We've, a family member has had a medical crisis or is coming out of the hospital and needs someone at the house when they get home. And so you're under a lot of pressure to make decisions. And so when someone who has high credentials has given you a recommendation so firmly, you think, perfect. But you have to do your due diligence, and that may take some time. And in the meantime, you may need to gather all your family resources, everyone take a turn being in the house with the person who needs care until you really feel certain about who you're choosing to help your family member.
It sounds like you had a bad experience with this person. Do you mind sharing the details with it? Did she steal?
I will, and we did discuss this in the book. Unfortunately, my family, as with many, many families across the country, experienced having someone steal money and jewelry and food. I'm a distance caregiver for my parents, and by the time I figured it out, quite a bit of damage had been done. We were fortunate that we were able to find evidence, and that person did go to jail. Wow. So, but that's not the case, as we have found out, for many people who are victims of this kind of criminal activity.
But she was so highly recommended. That's unusual, isn't it?
I suppose it could be, but I have also heard from others who say, and this is often true, the person could be really a fantastic caregiver who unfortunately has some other issues in their background that you don't know about, such as drug use, or a family member who has drug use. many, many different scenarios lead people to criminal activity who actually might be quite skilled. Amanda and I are often in a position where we are defending caregivers as a group because we work with so many honest people who will just, bend over backwards to help people in need. And these few bad apples really do make it hard for people to trust caregivers as a group.
Okay, we're about halfway through our show, and I want to say that I'm Patricia Stanford, along with my husband, Lamarr Stanford. And our guests today are Amanda Lambert and Leslie Eckford, who are authors of the book Aging with Care, a guide to hiring and managing caregivers at your home. You are listening to the Boomer Buzz on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC.
Hi, I'm Dr. Melinda Dunn with the American Academy of Family Physicians with important information on how you can prevent shingles. If you've had chickenpox, you're at risk for getting shingles, a very painful and potentially debilitating disease. Nearly 1 in 3 Americans will get shingles, and older adults are more at risk. But adults age 50 and older can get protection simply by getting the shingles vaccine. For more on immunizations, visit familydoctor.org or talk with your family physician.
If your skin could talk, would you listen? Stop tanning and protect your skin from melanoma, the second most common cancer in young women 15 to 29 years old. Learn more at spotskincancer.org. A message from the American Academy of Dermatology.
Welcome back to the Boomer Buzz on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC. I'm Dr. Lamarr Stanford, along with my wife, Patricia. Our guests today are Amanda Lambert and Leslie Eckford, who are authors of the book Aging with Care, which is a guide to hiring and managing caregivers at home.
So we talked a little bit about hiring and the pitfalls of hiring if we're not doing our due diligence. Do you have any thoughts about managing the caregivers once they are hired?
Amanda?
Was that a stumper?
Leslie's story was really sort of the impetus for our book, because I said to her before we wrote the book, I said I would never hire caregivers privately. I have my own business, and I always go through an agency, and I always recommend that families go through an agency for the very reasons that Leslie was talking about. That doesn't mean that problems won't happen, but a licensed bonded company will handle those problems. So, but to get to your question, if you're talking about hiring through an agency, and I deal with this every day, the turnover rate in the caregiving industry is about 85%. And so I help families decide on some good caregivers, but cautioning them that sometimes the best caregiver is going to leave. And so you have to get accustomed to new caregivers. It's just the nature of the business. But I always require and request that my client meet a potential caregiver first, so that there's sort of a mutual understanding and acceptance that this is the person that will be coming in, to provide sometimes the most intimate care. And so I think it's very important that people get to know each other. So I always recommend an agency, but I'll let Leslie talk about hiring privately.
And I have done both. And I want to point out to your listeners as well, you may find that a combination of hiring privately and hiring through an agency will work for you. The immediate question is, why would I have managed caregivers without an agency? The answer is that it's a lot less expensive. Okay. Of course, we outline in the book, if you do go the route of hiring privately, I give a lot of information about how to vet individual candidates, how to do payroll taxes and that sort of thing. But in terms of managing, we know people who, can put together various scenarios. For example, they may be able to have a family member be there on Monday and Wednesday. They may have a privately hired caregiver that they've vetted a couple of other days, and they may use an agency for overnight care, something like that. But in getting back to your question about how to manage, you really, and Amanda, I know we are firm believers in this, you must communicate. And with that turnover rate that Amanda mentioned, that can be very tricky. You've got to be very consistent about saying what your expectations are for the care for your loved one.
Okay.
I was going to ask you, a number of our friends have used some of the undocumented people that have come into the country. They don't speak English very well, but the price is right. In other words, they operate at a very low wage. I'm sure there's quite a bit of that going on in the country. And do you dare enter into that kind of a relationship?
Well, certainly we've known both situations where whether someone is documented or undocumented, there might be a language barrier. And we also know, I know of certain agencies that only have in their employee, or they actually sort of have a brokerage service for people who are coming into the country to do live-in care. And these are often people who are very, very dedicated to the caregiving role. They come from cultures where the elders are very much revered and appreciated. So sometimes it can be a plus. Mm-hmm. It just depends on the person and the family and their comfort level. And, of course, I will say it over and over again, that you check out to make sure that the person is who they say they are.
Right. I think my experience with my parents was that we had people that were great, and they just came in right off the bat. They were terrific. They knew what they were doing, and they did it. They knew what needed to be done. And then there were other people that I'd drop in on, and they were watching television shows with my parents. So, sometimes I felt like this is very worthwhile, and it's worth the money, and sometimes I felt like, wasn't doing very much at all. So I was thinking about that in terms of managing the day-to-day kind of things that the caregiver would do.
Mm-hmm. And how about if let's say you hire one of these undocumented persons, they can communicate, not too bad, but could you install a security system whereby you have cameras and a microphone so you can hear what's going on and just monitoring it? You don't have to be there, but they know that this system exists, so therefore, does that help?
Leslie, I think you can speak to that.
Yeah, I have to speak from experience with that. After the situation where the criminal caregiver took advantage of my family, I absolutely did install cameras, and I can tell you that I sort of have a little bit of a test with caregivers. Anyone who comes in who's really uncomfortable with that, I just wonder how long they're going to last. Other people are like, oh, yeah, I would do this if it were my family member, of course, in my home. So most good caregivers understand what your motivation for that. And I can guarantee you, speaking from my own experience, you're not going to sit in front of that camera monitoring when, every waking hour or get up in the middle of the night. But it's just a nice insurance to know that it's there. But we also have our older adults who are not happy with the camera in their home either. So you've got to keep that in mind as well.
Okay.
Yeah, it's an invasion of privacy, really.
Certainly.
I think that's why some people object to it, but I think it does partially solve that problem. But, the idea that a caregiver is not doing their job, it happens. Mm-hmm. Sometimes you just get a terrific caregiver, and they're just wonderful. They do a job, there's a connection, and then you get other people that are just biding their time, or they don't really connect with the person, or they just don't do the job. And I think, getting back to Leslie's comment of having very clear expectations, in any agency that I use, I make certain that they have a very well-defined plan of care for the client, and that's flexible. It can change because people's needs change. But the caregiver, to their credit, I think most of them really want to do the right thing, but if they don't know what that thing is, we can't really blame them.
Sure.
I think we have to communicate clearly and just let them know what's expected.
Mm-hmm. What is a plan of care, by the way?
It outlines a person's, basic demographics, what their medical problems are, what their interests are, what their medications are, and then what are the tasks that the caregiver is expected to do. And those should be, I think, laid out in a very specific way. I don't think you can over-communicate, I think the bigger problem is just not letting people know what's expected of them. And so a lot of people go, well, there wasn't enough to do today. Well, typically there's plenty to do, but if people don't know what to do, so that should be in the plan of care as well. And I think that we really underestimate what people enjoy doing. What is a person's leisure interests? Do they like to play cards? Do they like to go on outings? Do they like to go for a walk? So all of those things should be in the plan of care so that the caregiver can get to know the person.
Is it crucial that the caregiver and the patient can communicate? In other words, we talked about some of the undocumented people who can't speak English very well.
Boy, that's a really good question. I
think that people do develop a rapport, even if the language is limited.
I would agree.
I think it comes down to trust. When an older person who is vulnerable and usually not very happy about being vulnerable, it develops through some time with a caregiver that sense of trust. Well, this person is not going to let me drop on the bathroom floor. This person is not going to make me sit and be cold. They're going to take care of me and make sure that I have plenty to eat and drink, or sort of the opposite of that. This caregiver is going to let me see how I can do on my own with certain tasks and that sort of thing. That's such a balance to maintain that respect and independence.
Excellent.
And I would agree that it's entirely possible. But on the other hand, I know that there are people that absolutely require that the caregiver be able to communicate clearly in English. Right.
That's wonderful.
That's just a requirement.
Thank you so much. This has been great. I'm sorry to say that we're out
of time, ladies.
But if someone's interested in learning more about, how can they get a copy of your book to learn more about what
I'd like to buy a copy of that. That sounds great.
So the book is available
on Amazon.
Okay.
Yeah, yes.
Yeah, Amazon and Barnes & Noble. Yes.
Okay. Thank you so much.
We want to thank our guests, Amanda Lambert and Leslie Eckford. They have given us a good background on caregivers in the home in particular, and so maybe we could ask them to come back. Do you...
I'm Patricia Stanford, along with my husband, Dr. Lamarr Stanford. This show will be available as a podcast on iTunes, Android Podcasts, Spotify, and Spreaker.com. If you have any comments, email them to us anytime at WHPC@ncc.edu. Thank you for listening to the Boomer Buzz here on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC.